I think the baby boomers as often condemn their own generation as defended. They're confused. They don't necessarily know what to make of it, unless, of course, they're true believers. You know, they can be true believers on one side of the political divide and say, my generation was the worst, most self-indulgent, horrible mess, or be baby boomers on the kind of progressive side and say, we were right all along and you people are just too stupid to realize it, and, you know, let's go out and protest something else. You know, they're self-righteous, they're self-critical, they're contradictory. I describe the baby boom as the contradictory entity that it wasn't.
Although young Ted Eastwood has an ascribed status of middle class,
under a tight security guard of state police, Governor George
he was born with.
Baby boomers were a very particular demographic. And so when you look at demographic trend lines over the 20th century, you see the baby boom as the exception to all of those trend lines. So fertility rates in the U.S. have been on a long-term decline for all of the 20th century. But there was a brief exception, and that started in 1946 and lasted until the end of 1964. And that boom in fertility rates was then matched by a similar demographic boom in the total number of births. So the number of births per year was below 3 million a year until 1946, when it jumped up to 3.4 million, and then later jumped above 4 million births per year and stayed there until 1965. So baby boomers are an identifiable generational cohort because they are this demographic phenomenon that characterized the middle part of the 20th century.
The GI Bill of Rights is not a reward or a handout or a gravy train, but rather an American way to make it easier for each man to take his place once again in the community and get some of those things for which he went to war: a job, a business, an education, a home.
Baby boomers came of an age in a time of economic prosperity and optimism about the future. And it was this presumption of prosperity that really defined and shaped the baby boomer point of view. We refer to it as the psychology of affluence. Baby boomers came of age in a time when they could just take it for granted that their lives would work out.
The World War II generation, or what Tom Brokaw called the greatest generation, and they fought against some of the worst tyranny that ever existed, and many of them lived through a horrendous depression, which deprived them of the sense that the American dream was possible. So the war ended, and the 50s came about. They wanted their piece of suburbia, they wanted stability, they didn't want to rock the boat. They wanted to join the organization, become organization men and women, and sort of live that nice Leave It to Beaver life.
The other piece of this was that the parents of the baby boomers pretty much believed that the struggle for survival was over in this country. They were living the American dream. They were living middle classhood. The GI Bill, which somebody called the most important piece of legislation of the 20th century, was just propelling everybody into this wonderful world of home ownership and access to education. So you did not have to teach your kid how to do without or how to make it in a cold, hard world, because this wonderful, wonderful world was going to be one of unending prosperity, unending promise, unending fulfillment.
And that really created this focus on self. I don't have to worry about these other things, so I'm free to focus on making myself into a better person, to indulging myself, to expressing myself, and ultimately, hopefully finding some kind of self-fulfillment.
The baby boomers have always been about a quest for self, self-fulfillment, self-discovery, all kinds of pursuits. One of the founders of our firm used to say that baby boomers spent a lot of time crawling around their wormy little insides trying to find how fabulous and special they were. Now, along the way, we found out some of us weren't quite as fabulous and special as we thought we were.
As I like to say, baby boomers think they're special because their mothers told them they were. And again, I think it's because the generation before baby boomers wanted to give them a different kind of experience as they were coming of age, and so they did indulge them. And so baby boomers kind of grew up with this presumption of being an exceptional generation, and carried to an extreme can be annoying, and it can also be disappointing. And so you do see this sense of entitlement among baby boomers, and you see it most dramatically when baby boomers can't get what they want. So you don't kind of notice it until baby boomers run into a brick wall of limits. And then what you see is baby boomers saying, well, if there's not enough here for everybody, I'm at least going to make sure that I get my share. And so all of a sudden, baby boomers become very competitive, and you see this focus on winning, this focus on me rather than you.
If you're talking about the cliche about the baby boom, they're best characterized as self-indulgent, self-gratifying, selfish. But in fact, there are lots of characteristics of a generation, and generalizing about a generation is about the stupidest thing that you can do. The baby boom was selfless in many ways. It was selfish in others. It was stoned, but it was also inventive. The baby boom was not just, as the Daily News headline in the middle of Woodstock put it, hippies mired in a sea of mud. The baby boom also included, conservatives, cross-dressers, Buddhists, all kinds of people.
And look out upon the thousands of Negro faces and the thousands of white faces intermingle like the waters of a river. I see only one face. That is the face of the future.
If you look back at some of the really pivotal change that happened in this country in the 60s and the 70s, a lot of that was not initiated by baby boomers. It was initiated by the previous generation, the Betty Friedan's of the world, and some of the other leaders of a lot of the social change, people who were really clamoring for, equal rights for women and for racial equality and all of those other things. I mean, Lyndon Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act in 1964. He was not a baby boomer. But what baby boomers did was they picked up the cry. They picked up the proverbial gauntlet and they said, let's keep this moving.
Now, what baby boomers have done then is set the stage for all successive generations.
When I was on the book tour for my generation, first stop on the tour was in Seattle. And there were street riots going on in Seattle at that moment. And all I could think was, wow, isn't that great? It hasn't gone away. Idealism hasn't gone away. Blissful, wonderful, admirable stupidity hasn't gone away.
Your generation is part of your imprinting. It's a pair of glasses through which you view the world. And everything is filtered through that. So each generation is going to be different because what forms a generation are all of the influences that happen in their lives when they're younger. And you just don't lose that.
There are four characteristics that I think are sort of themes throughout baby boom culture that I think make baby boomers who they are. First, they don't accept authority very easily. Second thing about baby boomers is that even though they distrust authority, they respect ideals. Third part of the DNA is sort of this sense of individuality against the machine, this distrust of bureaucracy. Fourth part of the boomer DNA is youth and youthfulness. The whole notion, don't trust anyone over 30. So you have boomers that were anti-authority, that were idealistic, that pursued individuality, and saw youthfulness as the tonic to life. That's the baby boom DNA. You can understand a lot of what happens in boomer culture by seeing those four trends move their way through our society.
Can I buy a cop at less than list price?
Can I? No, of course you can't, but you can shop around and make a better deal on your old one, like I did.
Well, sure, you can make a deal with a little guy, but what I'm getting at is big businesses. The bigger they get, the harder it is for the little guy to get his.
For years, Virtually every business or organization, even every family, had top-down management. Father knows best may have seemed benign, but it was emblematic of a structure in which there were people at the top telling everybody what to do.
There were corporations, institutions, all kinds of authority figures in place. And baby boomers took a long, hard, critical look at all of these institutions and said, we don't like what we see. Part of that was naive, and part of that was wonderful. So what the baby boom really did is they wanted institutions to be accountable, and they wanted institutions to have an agenda that not only included making money, but doing social good.
What baby boomers really wanted to do during the 1960s was make the American system live up to its promise. They weren't trying to throw the baby out with the bathwater. They were trying to kind of fix the baby, if you will.
Baby boomers have always said that we have to hold society to its ideals because when we grew up, those ideals are being contradicted by the culture that we were living in. So here you have boomers consistently saying, live up to your ideals.
So you see, when ideals are sound and clear, they can help us to do some wonderful things. Even simple ideals, such as keeping promises or being popular, help us in the tremendously important business of getting along with other people. They help put things in the right perspective, and they serve as a challenge for us always to do better.
The World War II generation thought that baby boomers had betrayed them, that baby boomers went on a different path, that baby boomers rejected them. But what they didn't realize, yet they came to realize later on in life, is that baby boomers are actually embracing their parents' generation. What they were embracing were those ideals and values that their parents' generation taught them when they were young. What baby boomers had to show is that the society that the greatest generation created in the 1950s was not the society consistent with those ideals, and that created the tension.
The chief characteristic of the way in which baby boomers operate is to break the rules. So I'm going to make the system better by breaking the rules of how the system operates today. I'm going to make the marketplace better by breaking the rules of how I go about shopping. I'm going to make everything about child rearing better by breaking all the rules about how you raise families. You know, whatever it is, boomers have just said there's a better way, and I'm part of a special generation, and I know better than you, and I'm going to break the rules and do it differently. And so that's threatening. It's threatening to people who want to do it another way. It's threatening to those who are in authority at the time. And this insistence on breaking the rules, trying new things, experimenting, was really tumultuous during the 1960s. And it was focused on a lot of things that were very core to the American experience. So the Vietnam War and drug use and alternative lifestyles and the sexual revolution, gay rights and the women's movement, and boomers came along at the tail end of the civil rights movement, and then there was the environmental movement. And so all of these things challenged established interest. And baby boomers didn't want to overthrow the system. They wanted to make the system work better in all of these cases, and that meant doing things differently and breaking the rules. And that created a lot of conflict and a lot of turmoil in the process.
When the American consumer goes to market, he is bombarded with the claims of advertisers on the air, in the press, from all sides.
The relationship between boomers and business is kind of interesting because what business did was take all of the new things that baby boomers were doing and turn them into products to buy. So in effect, they commercialized the values revolution or the counterculture revolution or all the experimentation that baby boomers were doing. And that had the effect of legitimizing it to baby boomers. So it didn't feel so out of the norm anymore. And then baby boomers felt free to indulge in that. And so one of the factors that has always meant a lot to baby boomers in terms of consumerism is that by shopping you are expressing your individual values and a lot of the new and experimental things that have been important to you for all these years.
Well, the youth culture as a marketing gimmick was invented for the baby boom by some of the older members of the baby boom as well as a bunch of very smart, very cynical older people. So you could say it started with Kennedy, the young president. You could say it started with the Beatles. You could say it started in 1964 or 1965 when the word youthquake was coined. But what that phenomenon was all about was selling products. But it was the first time that there was a generational market defined, that generational market meant more money than any other market, and so all marketing began to concentrate on youth.
They really had a huge effect on the marketplace because brands had to adjust to baby boomers. Before baby boomers, it was all about, we will tell you what you want. We will tell you what you need. We will tell you what someone of your socioeconomic status should aspire to. Baby boomers threw a lot of that out. They said, I know what I want, and it's not the things everybody else wants because I'm special and I'm fabulous, so I'd want the marketplace to reflect that. So what brands had to do was respond to the baby boomers. I always think about how there was a time when everybody walked around with a black umbrella in the rain, and then all of a sudden baby boomers came along. You saw an explosion of color. Not only did you see color in the rain, you saw messages. And then messages went on T-shirts, and that's all baby boomers announcing, here I am, and here's what I care about, or here's who I think I am, or here's the rock concert I went to. Everyone needs to know. So the marketplace has had to adjust profoundly to baby boomers.
The ads that are most identified with baby boomers in the 1960s and the 1970s are really the ads that celebrated rule breaking. So if you think about the Uncola ad of 7-Up, or the very famous print ad of VW with the two words, think small, or Pepsi with the Pepsi generation, Noxzema, who said, take it off, take it all off.
It had a certain rebelliousness to it. There was a sense that you could, through those things you acquire, make a statement about yourself. So advertising married the commercial side of the culture with the expressive side of the culture.
As television started to be purchased in the 50s, they became affordable. There was TV program for baby boomers. So what that did was, you know, whether it was Mickey Mouse or Romper Room, I remember Ding Dong School where I grew up, there were so many programs that I think what that did was it kind of contributed to the baby boomer sense of, aren't we special? And then advertisers began to understand slowly but surely that they needed a different voice and tone to talk to this new generation.
1,000 screaming teenagers are at New York's Kennedy Airport to greet, you guessed it, the Beatles. This rock and roll group has taken over as the kingpins of musical appreciation among the younger element.
Well, pop culture these days really consists of kind of three things that baby boomers either created or grew up with. The first of those is TV. And while baby boomers didn't really invent TV, they were the first generation to grow up with television.
So television brought the 1960s into everyone's home, and it had a huge emotional impact on us all.
The second thing is actually the soundtrack of the generation.
You have folk music as the conscience of the culture. Then you had soul and blues music that broke the color line instantaneously. And of course you had rock and roll, which was essential music, a powerful music. Music played a huge role in the 1960s.
And then the third thing, of course, is computers. Baby boomers created the personal computer revolution. And Stuart Brand, who is a futurist and one of Ken Kesey's former merry pranksters back during the hippie days, has long said that the PC revolution was the lasting byproduct of the hippie generation.
A lot of people forget that part of the influence of the baby boom was because they were different than the generation before, but there were so many of them that anything they did and liked and cared about became just part of our culture so very, very quickly. If you think about pop culture as music and art and theater and movies and all that stuff, baby boomers were all about that. They went to it, they had the money to start attending all of that. And the other part of it is baby boomers kind of thought that they could be artistic if they wanted to. They could try their hands at anything. So pop culture was something that not only did they want to observe, they wanted to participate in. One of the words we use to define baby boomers is a youthful mindset. And what we mean by a youthful mindset is not running around in your kid's jeans and looking silly, or, you know, acting like a teenager when you're 62 or 57. What it is It's a mindset. It's an openness to change. It's saying my life isn't over. It's an openness to experimentation, not closure.
It's not the way you look, it's the way you think. It's the way you approach things. And baby boomers have always had a youthful approach to everything in their lives.
Baby boomers continue to be committed to that journey of self-discovery, and we continue to think that despite all the living we've done and the experimenting we've done and the good things we've done and the bad things we've done, that enlightenment may be around the next corner, so go for it.
They've always wanted to ask questions that could give you a different view of things. They've always wanted the next new adventure. They've always wanted to have fun, no matter what they did.
Because they still have this mental attitude or this mindset about fully participating in life, they cannot get old, because they understand if you're old and you lose your health or you lose your mental faculties or you start to think of yourself as old, you got to give up your seat at the table at some point, and they don't want to do that.
Boomers want to stay youthful because they don't want to live in sort of a stuck, rigid, frozen society, and till their final days, they want to be able to adapt to change and be current with what's going on. And you know what? That's healthier for society. Let the critics sneer all they want. The bottom line is it's far healthier when people stay youthful rather than people grow, old and crotchety.
The story of baby boomers is largely a story of boomers struggling with the gap between their youthful expectations and the realities of their adult lives.
The other problem, of course, with the baby boom is that a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them grew up slowly, kicking and screaming and fighting every inch of the way. They grew up. And the ones who didn't grow up, a lot of them were casualties, and there were a lot of casualties. But those of us, and I don't like generalizing, but those of us who survived couldn't help but notice the bodies in the road behind us. And if you had an ounce of sense, you had to draw some conclusions from the carnage that you'd lived through, because it stopped being innocent. Christ, it stopped being innocent when I was 16 years old, and I was still innocent for another 5 years. And then I began to notice as my best friends died, or went into rehab, or went to jail, and people cut their hair, and they bought suits, and they got jobs, and they tried to remain true to whatever ideals they had left. So I ended up a contrarian journalist.
It's easy to pick out the exceptions. It's easy to point to hypocrisy, but you can do that with any generation. The real key is what social changes have taken place and who is behind that, and baby boomers were behind that from the beginning in the 1960s when the lights were on them, up till today when they've changed institutions, schools, families, child rearing, almost every part of our society, but they've done it quietly without the lights shining on them. And that's how baby boomers have really changed America.
The history of the baby boom, particularly when you get past the cliches, is a really fascinating, multi-level, multi-layered excursion into a fascinating moment in the history of the world. That generation, mostly in America, but in a number of places in the Western world, had an incredible time, did incredible things. We accomplished things incredibly, and we screwed up incredibly. And not only were we responsible for LSD, we were also responsible for the computer revolution, which is now the most important thing in the world.
The baby boom has consistently reinvented itself, but it's always been about me and fulfillment and what I want and what I need and what I control and what I have to have and make sure you notice me. It's always been that, but it comes out in different forms as we've moved through the culture and as baby boomers respond to the culture. And because of their generational imprinting, that's the way they respond. They don't turn into their parents. They never have. They never will. Their reaction and response is still boomer.
I think that in the ultimate end story, which of course there never is, that a more rational view of the baby boom will take hold, that it will neither be the wonderful, wonderful, innocent, idealistic generation that tried to change the world, and it won't be the hedonistic hippies mired in a sea of mud, too stoned on their own bullshit to realize that the world was passing them by. It'll be something in between, because that's where the truth lies, is somewhere in between.